the pain like.
Hey guys, dearyoongi here, and welcome back to my channel. As many of us already know, it is fairly common within the K-pop industry for idols to be assigned an image or personality type and style to portray, when this may not even be close to who they are as a person. I wanted to start discussing some of these personality types, and in the interest of keeping things interesting, we're going to be looking at just one personality type in this video in particular, and maybe some others later down the line. Today we are going to be discussing the cool, mysterious guy persona within the K-pop industry. Examples of idols who have been assigned this image and perhaps why, before we look at the potential effects this may have on them. So first of all, let's just quickly go over what exactly we mean by the cool, mysterious guy image. A cool, mysterious guy persona typically refers to someone who kind of exudes an aura of confidence, in a way where you don't really get to even see it. A person with this image makes you feel a certain sort of intrigue towards them. You can't quite figure out who they are because they don't really share a great detail about it, so there's always an air of mystery around them, and that only makes them more alluring. Because the K-pop industry often gets the two terms cool and cold mixed up because they do mean different things, these members are often said to have a cold sort of demeanor, so they probably won't talk very much or have often pretty blank facial expressions, so you can't really see too much of what they're thinking. I am willing to bet that just based on this short description alone, you can probably name a few idols off the top of your head who have this sort of image. The most obvious example I can think of off the top of my head in the K-pop world is EXO member Chris. We will not be talking about him in today's video. To be honest, I didn't really want to mention him at all, but I have a feeling if I don't, somebody in the comments will say he was once the prime example of this image, and I agree, he was. But knowing what we do about him now and his charges, etc., I will not be discussing him any further on this channel. So let's move on to the first example of a cool, mysterious persona guy in K-pop that I wanted to discuss, which is the next one that springs straight to mind for me anyway, and that is VIX's Leo. Ever since the early days of the group, Leo was always the member who would probably speak the least, and usually had pretty blank facial expressions, almost as if at times he wasn't really engaging with the conversation or even appeared uninterested. For quite some time, it was assumed that Leo was just shy or unwilling to speak, as perhaps some of the more extroverted members, and while this may also be the case, two things can remain true at the same time, and it's pretty clear to see that this is a classic example of somebody who has been assigned the cool guy image. Another prime example of somebody who was assigned a cool, mysterious guy image is Infinite's L. I actually think this image was put onto him because of his looks, which sounds weird to say, but it is something I've noticed. Quite often in a group where a member is given this cool, mysterious guy image to portray, they pick the member with the striking, sharp visuals because people will just see them as unapproachable because of their looks, and that makes it even easier for them to portray the cool persona. On a very similar note, another member who was definitely assigned this sort of image based on his looks is Jaejoong during his time as a member of TVXQ. Jaejoong was actually given the mysterious charisma image, which is pretty much the same thing we've been discussing just in SM entertainment terms. I didn't want to get too much into each label and what they do, but oh did SM love giving their idols a specific image to follow within their group, regardless of whether or not it fits the group's concept. And in order to maintain this image he was given, Jaejoong was told not to talk too much, so much that it even became an inside joke amongst fans when he did speak, like, oh, they're letting Jaejoong talk today. And another thing I didn't want to talk about too much is example after example, because this video would get so long, and like I said earlier, I'm sure you guys are fully aware of the types of idols we're discussing. But one more example I wanted to touch upon, because it's actually two members of the same group, is BTS's Jin and Suga. Now anybody who's a fan of BTS will laugh at even the thought of Jin of all people being assigned the cool, mysterious, cold guy image, because that's just not him at all. But I think he was definitely more assigned this early in their debut era, whereas as time went on, it felt as though Suga more naturally fell into that role, because he did seem a bit more reserved on the outside, so they just kind of went with that as a more natural fit for the group's mysterious cool guy. Okay, let's move on past the examples and take a look at why labels might decide to give a member this cool guy sort of image. The cool and mysterious guy image is not a new concept, and it's definitely not just limited to the K-pop world. I think over the years in the Western pop world, boy bands will always have at least one cool and mysterious member who isn't necessarily as easy to read as the member that usually draws in the listeners, aka the lead heartthrob, but they do play a vital role in the group in enticing new fans who don't typically fall for the typical boy band persona. An example for us people who were teenagers in the 2010s is One Direction. I knew I would find a way to talk about One Direction on this channel eventually. I would say Harry Styles fell into the category of member who everybody recognises at first glance and is kind of known for having that lead boy sort of vibe.
I would hope that any women that I meet across the path would like me for me. And
like, okay, that guy's cute, he's mine.
Dibs.
Yeah, dibs.
No, we don't really do that, to be honest.
No. Okay.
We feel like that objectifies women, and that's not really what we're about.
But One Direction also had their cool, mysterious member in the shape of Zayn Malik. Zayn always had this sort of, I don't want to say standoffish vibe, but definitely a more cold demeanour, where on the outside, it didn't seem on the surface like he fit the boy band trademark stereotype. And you couldn't help but be more curious about him and who he was as a person.
Who is most likely to disappear for a couple of days without contacting the others?
Are you a hologram right now?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not real.
So it's only natural for K-pop to take on a similar sort of concept because it seemed to work, where they'd add a member in there, like we said earlier, who might be the visual to get your attention, who then could also be your cool guy, if you will. And for the fans who aren't keen on the idea of listening to pop, it makes you feel like you aren't just listening to a classic pop group, but something a bit more dark and exciting. There's an air of intrigue and mystery around that person that you can't quite figure out, and because humans are just naturally curious creatures, a potential fan may be more inclined to look them up and learn more about who they are and the group they are based on the member that doesn't give you the typical boy band vibe. Another potential reason the cool guy image could be given to an idol, I will admit, is more unlikely and probably not why they do it, but it is a nice idea, so let's look at it. And that is that it gives them a way in which they can create a sort of boundary between their idol life and their real life. Their stage name persona can have one vibe and energy completely different to their own, that they play as sort of a character, so they can sort of keep their real identity to themselves and for their closest loved ones. An example of this could be Infinite's L, who we looked at earlier. Fans have pointed out in the past how L, which is his stage name, and also his sort of stage persona, is very different to Myungsu, which is his real name, who is somebody who is completely different and gets to be more uniquely him. Again, I do like this idea, and this is like why this cool guy image is given, but because the K-pop industry does focus a lot on fan experience and making the listener feel as though they're connected to the group, this idea does feel a bit more idealistic and unlikely than the first, but fun to think about nevertheless. Now, this wouldn't be a dearyoongi video if we didn't talk about the detrimental effects of the topic at hand. So let's look at the issues with the cool mysterious guy image. I mentioned it briefly in the beginning of the video because I wanted to elaborate here. But one thing I think these labels seem to forget sometimes is that giving somebody a cool mysterious image is all well and good, but the best way to do that isn't necessarily tell them not to talk or engage with conversations or to have a blank uninterested expression, because being a cool person and being a cold person are very different things. This isn't going to be an English lesson, don't worry. But the word cool can have two different meanings. It could be somebody who is enviable because of their looks and demeanour, etc., that everybody just admires. Or cool can mean somebody who usually remains calm and collected. Describing somebody as cold, however, means that they tend to lack emotion and can sometimes be like unfriendly or maybe not empathetic, etc. The latter has a lot more negative connotations than the former two. And unfortunately, mixing up all these terms into an image can lead to misunderstandings, and this has happened in the past. We mentioned VIX's Leo as our first example, and back in 2014, Leo was actually criticised for his aloof attitude when the group appeared on Weekly Idol. A writer on the show, Cha Yoon-ah, pointed out that she felt Leo was difficult to work with on the show, which usually relies on idols' ability to bounce off energy and jokes with the hosts. She even pointed out that there was a section where the hosts at the time had to ask if he was mad, or if that was just his usual expression, to which he just replied, yes. Now, this whole situation, of course, was almost 10 years ago now, and was completely mishandled by everybody involved, and completely unprofessionally. Ironically, with everyone except Leo himself, the person who they were criticising. Because Leo was doing his job, believe it or not. His role within the group at the time was to be the cold guy who didn't really speak, though he tried his best not to engage wherever possible. The idea that different members have different personas, if this is something that they're insisting on exploring, is something that the show on the label should have liaised over prior to into filming to ensure that this sort of thing was something everyone on set was aware of and no misunderstandings occurred. Because through not taking proper measures in advance, it led to somebody on a TV set thinking Leo was rude or hard to work with, which can be extremely damaging to have out there, both with K-pop fans who may not know the group's dynamic and will use this information to be hateful, but also with professionals within the K-pop industry who may see comments like this from fellow industry insiders and think this group or individual are not somebody you want to be working with if they're going to be difficult. And the other obvious detriment to the cool, mysterious guy persona is that the idols will not be able to portray who they really are, and that can be extremely damaging, not just for fans, but to the idols themselves, especially when they debut so young. Imagine being given a completely different persona to portray during your formative years, while you're still trying to figure out for yourself who you really are. That can only be detrimental to you in the long run. It is of course important to remember that we can't always assume that an idol has been given this image. Maybe they are just like that and prefer to have a more quiet or timid demeanor because they're more introverted. And that's absolutely fine. Nobody should be pushed too far out of their comfort zone if they don't want to be. But in the examples we have discussed today, and I'm sure many others we did not quite touch upon, this isn't exactly the case. There is so much more to these individuals' personalities that they might want to share through the little peeks we see on variety shows where they kind of break character, because those parts of their real personality aren't that hidden behind these personas when you peel back the mask a little bit. But we aren't getting to see the real them because the labels aren't letting us. So let's just go over our examples from earlier and sort of clear their names, if you will. Vix is Leo, whose cold guy image led to him getting critiqued by professionals and getting into a little trouble within the industry. He's actually a very loving friend, group member, and family member. Infinite's L is more than his cool guy visuals, and is also very fun, playful, and even clumsy at times. Jaejoong, previously of TVXQ, he is not the silent guy SM Entertainment wanted him to be. He is very entertaining on his TV show where he's the host, and is always nothing but welcoming and engaging with guests. BTS's Jin and Suga. I refuse to call either of these men cold, or even mysterious, because when you look slightly past the surface, you can just see how fun and open they are. I could write a 10-page essay on how Suga is not the cold guy people portray him to be alone. Maybe that needs to be a video that I bring to life on the dearyoongi channel. Conclusion time. You'll notice that most of the examples I decided to include today are from older groups from previous generations, because I'm not too sure if this image is as common anymore as it used to be. That's not to say there aren't any idols assigned this image anymore. I'm sure this will still continue to be in some capacity across idols around today, but out of all different images you can be given to use, I don't necessarily think that this one has the most potential to be successful, unlike some others. There is some potential that it could entice people to get to know this member or group, sure. Or alternatively, it could just lead to audiences thinking they're rude, ungrateful, and not worth your time or attention to look into. The risk probably outweighs the reward, which in an industry like that of the K-pop world, where they're expected to be on their best behavior wherever possible, it just doesn't seem worth it. In my opinion, it's absolutely fine for a label to want their members to look cool or portray that "you want to get to know me" image, because that's a good way to entice new fans and listeners, but I do think they need to be a lot more careful in how this is done to avoid any misunderstandings and any idols being unfairly hated on and accused of poor behavior when they're literally just doing the jobs they have been told to do. Okay guys, and that was it for today's video. Not gonna lie, it's longer than I was expecting this to be, so I hope you enjoyed it anyway and it's not too ranty. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and please let me know in the comments your thoughts on this topic and perhaps any other K-pop personas you yourself have spotted and would like me to talk about. If you're new here and haven't yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification bell to be the first to hear whenever I upload, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!